Lyra spent the next 3 weeks doing something that no human advisor had ever done before. She studied the Corvathinit, just their military tactics, but their history and their culture and their language and everything she could find about who they had been before they joined the coalition. The other human advisors thought she was wasting her time. Taurus told her that their job was simply to survive as long as possible and maybe send some useful intelligence back to Earth before they died. Kim said that the Corvati were too stubborn to change and that trying to help them was pointless. But Lyra could not stop thinking about what she had seen in that battle. 2,000 soldiers walking into certain death because their culture told them it was the only honorable choice. There had to be another way. She found an unexpected ally in a young Corvati communications officer named Sarath. Sarath was different from the other Corvati in ways that were hard to describe at first. She was smaller than most of her species, and she had a habit of asking questions that made her superiors uncomfortable. She was also the only Corvati who did not treat Lyra like a piece of furniture or a walking insult. "You spend much time reading our old records," Sarah said one evening when she found Lyra in the archive room. "Most humans do not care about Corvati history. Most humans are not trying to understand why your people keep dying in battles they should be winning," Lyra replied. Sarath was quiet for a moment, and then she sat down across from Lyra. "I have wondered the same thing," she admitted. "My grandfather was a soldier, and my father was a soldier, and they both died in charges. Just like the one you witnessed. I was told they died with honor, but I always wondered if honor was worth more than their lives." Lyra looked at her with new respect. "That is a dangerous question to ask around here." "Yes, that is why I only ask it to myself, until now." They began working together. In secret, Sarath helped Lyra access records that were not available to outsiders and translated texts that were written in ancient forms of the Corvati language. What they discovered changed everything Lyra thought she knew about the Corvathith. Modern honor code was not ancient at all. It had been created only about 300 years ago when the Corvasi first made contact with other spacefaring species. Before that, the Corvathi had been very different. The oldest records described a species of pack hunters who survived on a dangerous world by being smart and patient and ruthless. They did not charge their prey in the open. They stalked it through forests and mountains and waited for the perfect moment to strike. They used ambush and traps and misdirection. They attacked from the shadows and vanished before their enemies could respond. They were predators in the truest sense of the word. But when they joined the galactic community, they encountered species who looked down on these tactics. Other races called them primitive and sneaky and cowardly. The Corvati were proud beings, and they could not stand being disrespected, so they changed. They created a new honor code based on direct confrontation and open warfare. They rewrote their history to hide the old ways within a few generations. The truth was forgotten, and the Corvati became exactly what other species expected them to be. Brave, stupid soldiers who would die gloriously while accomplishing nothing. "This is incredible," Lyra said as she read through another ancient text. "Your ancestors were brilliant tacticians. They won wars against enemies that outnumbered them 10 to 1. They were survivors. And then they decided that surviving was shameful," Sarah said bitterly. "They traded their future for the approval of species who did not respect them anyway." Lyra began to form a plan. She could not ask the Corvathi to abandon their honor code. That would never work, but maybe she could show them that the honor code was not what they thought it was. Maybe she could remind them of who they used to be. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. A massive hegemony force had trapped the remnants of 3 Corvati columns in a narrow valley called the Throat of Kalas. Nearly 4,000 soldiers were surrounded with no hope of rescue or escape. High General Thalvex ordered them to prepare for a final charge at dawn. It would be a beautiful death, the kind of death that would be remembered in songs for generations, but it would still be death. Lyra went to Captain Varth with her plan. "Let me speak to them," she said, "before the charge. Give me 1 hour to talk to the soldiers." Varth looked at her like she had lost her mind. "You want to speak to 4,000 Korvathi warriors on the eve of their glorious death? What could you possibly say to them?" "The truth. I want to tell them the truth about who they are." "And what truth is that?" Lyra took a deep breath. "That they are hunters, not cattle walking to slaughter. They are the descendants of the most dangerous predators their world ever produced, and they have forgotten how to hunt." Something flickered in Varth's black eyes. Something that might have been hope or might have been curiosity. "The High General will have you killed for interfering with his orders." "Probably. But those soldiers are going to die anyway if someone does not do something. I would rather die trying to save them than die watching them throw their lives away." Varth was silent for a long time then. He did something that surprised Lyra completely. He smiled. "I have watched my soldiers die for 15 years, human. I have given the orders that sent them to their deaths, and I have hated myself for every single one. If you have even the smallest chance of saving them, then I will give you that chance." He stood up and grabbed his communication device. "Sarath, connect me to the throat of Kalas. Commander Chun has something to say to our soldiers." Lyra felt her heart pounding as Sarath established the connections. She was about to do something that had never been done before. A human addressing a Korvathi army directly. If she failed, they would ignore her and die in the morning. Charge. If she succeeded, she would be changing the course of an entire species. And either way, High General Thalvex would probably kill her for it. She looked at the communication screen showing thousands of Korvathi soldiers waiting in that valley. And she began to speak. "Warriors of the Korvathi Legion, my name is Lyra Chun, and I am a human. I know you have been ordered to charge at dawn, and I know you believe this is the honorable way to die." She paused and looked at Sarath, who nodded encouragingly. "But I have been studying your history. Not the history you were taught, but the real history that was hidden from you centuries ago. And I have learned something that your leaders do not want you to know." The soldiers were watching her now with curiosity and confusion. "Your ancestors were not chargers. They were hunters. The most deadly hunters their world had ever seen. They did not run at their prey in the open. They stalked it and surrounded it and struck from the shadows." She could see some of the soldiers shifting uncomfortably. "You have been told that these tactics are shameful, but your ancestors called them something else. They called them smart. They called them survival." Lyra leaned forward and put every ounce of conviction she had into her voice. "Tomorrow you can charge across that valley and die like cattle. Or you can remember who you really are. You can hunt these enemies the way your ancestors hunted. You can make them fear the darkness. You can make them understand that the Korvathi are not victims." She took a breath. "You are predators." The silence stretched for a long moment. Then, one of the soldiers in the front raised all 4 of his arms and let out a howl that seemed to shake the air itself. More soldiers joined him until the entire valley was filled with the sound of 4,000 Korvathi screaming their defiance at the stars. Lyra felt tears forming in her eyes. They were listening. Now she just had to help them survive. The transport ship shook hard as it entered the atmosphere of Veth9 and Commander. Lyra Chung grabbed the metal bar above her seat to keep herself steady. She looked around at the 11 other humans in the cargo hold and saw the same expression on every face, a mixture of fear and determination that she had come to know well during her years in military service. They were all wearing the gray uniforms of the Galactic Coalition, but the uniforms did not fit properly because they had been designed for species with different body shapes. A voice came through the speakers in a language that sounded like grinding rocks, and then an automated translator converted it to English. "Human advisors prepare for landing at forward operating base. Kareth, you will report to High General Thalvex upon arrival." Lyra closed her eyes and thought about how she had ended up here. Humanity had made first contact with the Coalition just 3 years ago, and the negotiations had been difficult from the start. The Coalition was an alliance of 12 spacefaring species, and they had been fighting a brutal war against the hegemony for almost a century. They did not want new members who could not contribute to the war effort, and humanity had nothing to offer except bodies, so a deal was made. Humans would serve as military advisors and support personnel in the most dangerous parts of the war, and in exchange, humanity would receive protection and eventually full membership in the Coalition. Everyone knew what military advisors really meant. It meant cannon fodder. It meant sending humans to the battles that other species did not want to fight. It meant proving that humanity was willing to bleed and die for a war that was not theirs. The transport landed with a heavy thump, and the rear doors opened to reveal a gray landscape covered in ash and broken rock. Veth9 was a moon that had been beautiful once, but decades of fighting had turned it into a wasteland. Lyra stepped out and immediately felt the cold wind cut through her uniform. Standing in front of her was a creature that made her heart beat faster with instinctive fear. The Kolvathi were massive beings that stood nearly 3 meters tall, with thick scaled skin and 4 arms that ended in clawed hands. Their faces were flat with wide mouths full of sharp teeth, and their eyes were completely black like pools of ink. This particular Kolvathi wore armor covered in scratches and dents, and had a long scar running across his face. From one eye to the corner of his mouth, "I am High General Thalvex," he said through the translator device on his chest. "You are the human advisors." It was not a question. Lyra stepped forward and saluted in the human military fashion. "Commander Lyra Chun reporting for duty, sir. We are ready to serve the Coalition." Thalvex made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a growl. "Ready to serve," he repeated. "The Coalition sends me 12 soft creatures who cannot survive our gravity without assistance suits, and tells me they are ready to serve." He leaned down until his face was close to Lyra's, and she could smell his breath, which was hot and carried the scent of meat. "I have been fighting this war for 40 years, human. I've watched my soldiers die by the thousands, while the Coalition sends us outdated weapons and broken ships, and now they send me you." He straightened up and turned away. "You will be assigned to the units that need you most, which means the units that are already dying. Try not to slow them down too much before the hegemony kills you." Lyra was assigned to the 9th column, along with 2 other humans named Torres and Kim. The 9th column existed only on paper, according to the records, because it had been destroyed and rebuilt so many times that it was considered cursed by the other Kolvathi units. Its commander was a captain named Varath, who had once been considered one of the most promising young officers in the Legion before something had broken inside him. Lyra found him in a storage building, drinking a thick liquid from a metal container. "Another human advisor," Vorath said without looking up. "The last one survived for 6 days. Do you think you can beat that record?" "I plan to survive a lot longer than 6 days, sir." Lyra replied. Vorath finally looked at her, and she saw that his black eyes were tired and full of pain. "Plans do not matter here, human. The hegemony has better weapons and better tactics and better intelligence. We have courage and numbers, and neither of those things are enough anymore." Over the next few days, Lyra learned the truth of his words. She studied the Kolvathi battle records and watched training exercises and spoke with soldiers who had survived dozens of engagements. What she discovered made her feel sick. The Kolvathi were brave beyond measure, but their bravery was killing them. Their entire military doctrine was built around the concept of honor, which demanded direct confrontation with the enemy. Retreat was considered shameful, and any commander who ordered a retreat would be stripped of rank, and their family would carry the dishonor for generations. Flanking maneuvers were seen as cowardly because they meant attacking an enemy who could not see you coming. Using cover was acceptable, but only briefly, because hiding for 2 Long was also considered shameful. The result was predictable. Every battle followed the same pattern. The Kovathi would charge directly at the enemy positions, and the hegemony would cut them down with automated weapons and precision. Strikes from orbit. Thousands of Kovathi died in every major engagement, and they rarely killed more than a handful of enemy soldiers in return. When Lyra suggested changes to Captain Vorath, he laughed bitterly. "You think I do not know our tactics are failing human? Every officer knows, but we cannot change. Our honor code does not allow it." "Then change the honor code." Lyra said. Vorath stared at her for a long moment. "You do not understand. The honor code is everything to us. It is older than our civilization. It defines what it means to be Kovathi. Asking us to abandon it is like asking you to stop breathing." Lyra wanted to argue, but she could see that Vorath believed what he was saying completely. The honor code was not just tradition to the Kovathi. It was their identity, their religion, their entire way of understanding the universe, and it was going to kill every single one of them. 3 days later, the hegemony launched a major offensive, and Lyra watched from the command post as 2,000 Kovathi soldiers charged across an open field toward enemy positions. The automated defense systems activated, and beams of light swept across the charging soldiers. Bodies fell by the dozens, then by the hundreds. The Kovathi kept charging because that was what honor demanded. By the time the survivors reached the enemy lines, there were only 300 left, and they were cut down in close combat by hegemony soldiers who had simply waited for them to arrive exhausted and depleted. 2,000 soldiers dead. Enemy had not lost a single fighter. Lyra stood in the command post with tears running down her face, and something inside her changed forever. She had been sent here to die. Everyone knew that. Humanity was supposed to fail alongside these proud warriors and be forgotten by history. But she could not accept that anymore. She could not watch this slaughter continue and do nothing. She did not know how yet, but she was going to find a way to save them, or she was going to die trying. The weeks following the Battle of the Throat of Kalos were the most dangerous of Lyra's life, and not because of the hegemony. The enemy she faced now came from within the Kovathi Legion itself, a faction of traditionalist officers led by a general named Krathver refused to accept the new tactics. They called Lyra a corrupting influence and demanded that High General Thalvex execute her for undermining Kovathi culture. They called the soldiers who had fought at the throat of Kalos cowards and traitors. They insisted that the honor code was sacred and unchangeable, regardless of how many Kovathi had to die to preserve it. Krathver was a massive Kovathi, even by the standards of his species, and he had won dozens of battles using traditional tactics. He was also responsible for some of the highest casualty rates in the entire Legion. His soldiers died in greater numbers than any other unit, but he considered this proof of their courage rather than evidence of his failure as a commander. "The human has poisoned your minds," Krathver declared at a gathering of senior officers. "She has turned proud warriors into skulking vermin who attack from shadows, like animals. This is not victory. This is disgrace." Lyra stood before the assembled officers, knowing that her life depended on what happened in the next few minutes. "General Krathver," she said calmly, "how many soldiers have you lost in the past year?" Krathver straightened with pride. 12,000 brave warriors who died with honor on the field of battle. "And how many enemy soldiers did those 12,000 manage to kill before they died?" Krathver hesitated. "That is not the point. The point is that they faced the enemy directly and died as true Kovathi. The point," Lyra replied, "is that 12,000 of your soldiers are dead, and the hegemony barely noticed. You are not fighting a war, General. You are conducting a mass suicide and calling it honor." The room erupted in angry shouts from the traditionalist officers. Thalvex raised his hand for silence. "Commander Chun," he said, "General Krathver has challenged the legitimacy of your position as tactical advisor. He claims that a human has no right to tell Kovathi had a fight. He has demanded satisfaction. Through traditional combat, Lyra felt her stomach drop. Traditional combat meant fighting Crathford directly, a 3-meter tall warrior with 4 arms and centuries of combat experience, against a human woman who weighed less than a quarter of what he did. She would die in seconds. I accept the challenge, she heard herself say. The room went silent. Even Crathford looked surprised. Sareth grabbed Lyra's arm. You cannot do this. He will kill you. I know, Lyra replied quietly. But if I refuse, he will use that refusal to discredit everything we have accomplished. The traditionalists will say that humans are cowards, who only know how to hide and ambush. They will undo all the progress we have made. Then let someone else fight him. Captain Vareth would stand as your champion. Lyra shook her head. It has to be me if I'm going to ask Kovathi soldiers to change the way they have fought for centuries. Then I have to be willing to face the consequences myself. The combat took place in a circular arena that the Kovathi used for settling disputes. Lyra was given a traditional blade, a curved weapon almost as long as she was tall, and light armor that would not stop a serious blow but might give her a few extra seconds of survival. Crother did not even bother with armor. He stood in the center of the arena, holding his blade loosely and watching Lyra with contempt in his black eyes. I will make this quick, human, he said, out of respect for the entertainment you have provided. The signal was given, and Crathford charged. He was fast, impossibly fast for something so large, and his blade swept through the air in an arc that would have cut Lyra in half if it had connected, but Lyra was not there. She had studied Kovathi combat for weeks, and she knew that their fighting style relied on overwhelming force and direct attacks. They did not expect their opponents to move unpredictably. She dove and rolled and came up behind Crathford, slashing at the back of his leg. The blade cut through scales and drew blood. Not a serious wound, but enough to make him stumble. Crathford roared with rage and spun around, swinging his blade in a wide circle. Lyra dropped flat and felt the weapon pass over her head, close enough to cut some of her hair. She scrambled away and got back to her feet. The crowd was murmuring now. Oh, one had expected her to survive more than a few seconds. Crathford attacked again and again, but Lyra refused to stand and fight directly. She dodged and weaved and retreated and struck only when she had a clear opening. She cut his arm. She slashed his side. She stabbed at his knee when he overextended on a lunge. Each wound was minor, but they were adding up. Crathford was bleeding from a dozen cuts, and his movements were getting slower. Fight me properly, he bellowed. Stand and face me like a warrior. Why? Lyra asked, breathing hard. So you can kill me easily. So you can win without having to work for it. Is that what honor means to you, General? Winning without effort. She ducked another swing and opened a cut on his forearm. I am fighting you the only way I can win, and I am winning. You are bleeding and tired, and I am still standing. How is that not honorable? Crathford hesitated, and in that moment of hesitation, Lyra saw her chance. She threw her blade directly at his face. It was not a killing blow. She did not have the strength for that, but it forced him to raise his arms to protect his eyes, and while his arms were up, Lyra ran directly at him and drove her shoulder into his wounded knee. Crathford fell. He crashed to the ground with a sound like thunder, and before he could recover, Lyra had grabbed his own fallen blade and pressed it against his throat. The arena was completely silent. I yield. Crathford said the words, seeming to cause him physical pain. Lyra stepped back and dropped the blade. I did not fight you the way a Kovathi would fight, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. I fought you the way a human fights, and I won. Not because humans are stronger or faster, but because we have learned that survival matters more than looking brave. She turned to address the assembled officers. Your ancestors knew this too. They were hunters who used every advantage they could find. They did not care if their prey thought they were honorable. They only cared about winning. She looked at Thalvax. The hegemony does not care about your honor code. They do not respect your courage. They just want you dead. And every time you charge directly into their weapons, you are giving them exactly what they want. She pointed at the blood on the arena floor, her blood mixed with Krathver's. I'm not asking you to become humans. I am asking you to become the hunters your ancestors were. I am asking you to stop dying for nothing and start fighting to win. The silence stretched for a long moment. Then Vara stepped forward and knelt before Lyra in the Corvathi. Gesture of respect. One by one, other officers joined him. First a few, then dozens, then hundreds. Even some of Krathver's own subordinates knelt. Traditionalists watched in shock as the tide turned against them. Thalvax walked to the center of the arena and helped Krathver to his feet. The combat is concluded, and the challenge is settled, he announced. Commander, Chun will continue as tactical advisor to the Legion, and we will learn everything she has to teach us. He looked at the kneeling officers. The hunt begins now, and this time we will not stop until the hegemony learns to fear the Corvathi again. The roar that erupted from the crowd shook the walls of the arena. Lyra stood in the center of it all, bleeding and exhausted. And more alive than she had ever felt. She had gambled everything and won. Now came the hard part, turning an army of proud warriors into an army of hunters. The transformation of the Corvathi Legion did not happen overnight. Lyra spent months working with officers at every level, teaching them tactics that humans had developed over thousands of years of warfare. She taught them about flanking maneuvers and how attacking an enemy from an unexpected direction could cause panic even in disciplined troops. She taught them about supply lines and how an army without food and ammunition would collapse, regardless of how brave its soldiers were. She taught them about reconnaissance and the value of knowing where your enemy was before they knew where you were. She taught them about retreating, not as an act of cowardice, but as a tactical tool to draw enemies into unfavorable positions. Most importantly, she taught them that every soldier's life had value beyond their death. A dead soldier cannot fight in the next battle. She told them over and over. A wounded soldier requires resources to care for them, but a healthy soldier who survives today can kill enemies tomorrow and the day after that. Survival is not selfishness, it is strategy. Captain Vorath became her most dedicated student. He had spent 15 years sending soldiers to die in battles he knew they could not win, and the guilt had nearly destroyed him. Now he threw himself into the new methods with the passion of a man seeking redemption. I used to drink to forget their faces, he told Lyra one evening. All the soldiers I sent to die, I remembered every single one. Now I am learning how to keep them alive, and it feels like waking up from a nightmare. Sareth was promoted to lead the Legion's new intelligence division. The Corvathi had never valued intelligence gathering because their honor code demanded direct confrontation. What was the point of knowing where your enemy was if you were just going to charge straight at them anyway? Now scouts and spies became essential parts of every operation. They mapped enemy positions and identified weak points and tracked supply convoys. They gathered information that allowed Corvathi commanders to choose when and where to fight instead of simply reacting to whatever the hegemony did. The results were immediate and dramatic. In the 3 months after Lyra's combat with Krathver, the Corvathi Legion fought 14 major engagements. They won 12 of them. Their casualty rates dropped by almost 80%, while enemy losses increased by the same amount. Soldiers who had expected to die in their first battle were surviving and gaining experience and becoming more dangerous with every fight. But not everyone was happy with the changes. General Krathver had publicly accepted his defeat, but he had not forgotten his humiliation. He gathered other traditionalist officers around him and began plotting in secret. They called themselves the True Corvathi, and they believed that Lyra's methods were destroying everything that made their species great. We are becoming something unrecognizable, Krathver told his followers. Our ancestors would be ashamed of what we have become, sneaking through shadows and running from battle like prey animals. This is not victory. This is the death of our identity. The true Kovathi began sabotaging operations. They leaked intelligence to the hegemony. They disobeyed orders at critical moments. They spread rumors that Lyra was using mind control technology to manipulate Kovathi soldiers. The situation came to a head during an operation to capture a hegemony supply. Based on a planet called Varith 3, the plan was simple. Kovathi forces would surround the base and cut off all escape routes before launching a coordinated assault from multiple directions. But Krathor's unit was responsible for blocking the northern approach, and when the assault began, they were not in position. The hegemony garrison escaped through the gap, and the operation failed. Worse than that, 300 Kovathi soldiers died in the chaos when enemy reinforcements arrived through the same gap. Thalvex was furious. He summoned Krathor to answer for his failure, and the general did not even try to deny what he had done. I will not help the human destroy our culture, Krathor declared. Every victory she wins costs us a piece of our soul. I would rather lose battles as true Kovathi than win them as something else. 300 soldiers died because of your pride. Thalvex said, his voice cold with anger. They died with honor, as all Kovathi should. They died for nothing, because you decided your beliefs were more important than their lives. Thalvex looked at the other officers in the room, officers who had fought alongside Lyra and learned her methods and seen the results. General Krathor, you are hereby stripped of your rank and command. You and your followers will be confined to quarters, pending trial for treason and sabotage. Krathor's supporters reached for their weapons, but they were outnumbered by soldiers. Loyal to Thalvex, there was a tense moment when it seemed like fighting might break out, but then Krathor raised his hand. This is not over, he said as guards surrounded him. The true Kovathi will not be silenced, and when your human advisor's methods fail and the hegemony destroys, use it so our spirits will be waiting to welcome your shamed souls to the afterlife. He was led away, and the immediate crisis was over, but Lyra knew that the division he represented was not gone. It was just hidden. She found Sareth waiting for her outside the command center. The trial will not change anything, Sareth said. Krathor has supporters throughout the Legion. They will not stop just because their leader is imprisoned. I know, Lyra replied. The only way to truly end this is to win so completely that no one can deny the value of the new methods. We need a victory so decisive that even the true Kovathi have to admit they were wrong. What kind of victory? Lyra looked up at the stars. The hegemony is preparing a major offensive. Our intelligence suggests they are planning to take the Hollow Sun system. If they succeed, they will control the most important strategic position in this sector, and the war will be effectively over. The coalition has tried to hold Hollow Sun 7 times. They have failed every time, because they fought the way the hegemony expected them to fight. We are going to do something different. Sarath's black eyes widened. You want to take command of the defense. I want to win the battle. That everyone thinks is unwinnable. I want to prove once and for all that the new methods work, and I want to do it so publicly that no one can ignore the results. Lyra turned to face her friend. Get me everything we have on the Hollow Sun system. Troop movements and defensive positions and supply routes. Everything. What are you planning? Lyra smiled grimly. I'm planning to teach the hegemony what it feels like to be hunted. She walked back into the command center to begin preparations. The biggest battle of her life was coming, and she intended to make sure it was a victory that would change the course of the entire war. The throat of Kalas was a narrow valley surrounded by steep cliffs and filled with caves and rock formations that had been carved by millions of years of wind and water. For a traditional Kovathi charge, it was a death trap. There was only one way out, and the hegemony had that exit blocked with automated weapons and 10,000 soldiers. But for hunters, It was something else entirely. It was a maze, a labyrinth of shadows and hiding places where predators could move unseen. Lyra spent the night before dawn working with the Korvathi officers over the communication link. She showed them maps of the terrain and explained tactics that humans had used throughout their history, guerrilla warfare and ambush techniques, and the art of making a larger enemy fight on your terms instead of theirs. Some of the officers resisted at first. "This is not how Korvathi fight," one of them growled. "This is exactly how Korvathi used to fight," Surth responded, "before we forgot who we were." By the time the sun began to rise, the soldiers had been divided into small hunting packs of 20 to 30 warriors. Each, they had identified every cave and shadow and hiding spot in the valley. They had mapped the enemy positions and found the weak points in their defensive lines, and when the hegemony commanders looked into the valley, expecting to see 4,000 Korvathi forming up for a suicidal charge, they saw nothing. The valley appeared empty. The hegemony general in command was confused, but not worried. He assumed the Korvathi were simply hiding and waiting for darkness to attempt an escape, ordered his troops to advance into the valley and flush them out. That was his first mistake. The first hegemony patrol entered the valley at mid-morning, 50 soldiers moving in a tight formation with their weapons ready. They never saw the Korvathi hiding in the rocks above them. The attack came from everywhere at once. Warriors dropping from ledges and emerging from caves and striking with the speed and precision of their ancient ancestors. The patrol was destroyed in less than 2 minutes. Not a single hegemony soldier survived to report what had happened. The Korvathi vanished back into the shadows before reinforcements could arrive. The hegemony general sent a larger force, 200 soldiers this time. The same thing happened. Then he sent 500. Korvathi did not fight them directly. Instead, they let the soldiers advance deep into the valley and then collapsed the narrow passages behind them with explosives that Lyra had helped them position during the night. The 500 soldiers found themselves trapped in small groups scattered throughout the maze. And then the hunting packs went to work by sunset. The hegemony had lost over 1,000 soldiers without killing a single Korvathi. General was furious. He ordered a full assault with his entire remaining force. This was exactly what Lyra had been waiting for, as 8,000 hegemony soldiers poured into the valley. The Korvathi hunting packs did not engage them directly. Instead, they circled around through hidden passages and emerged behind the enemy lines. They attacked the supply depot that the hegemony had established at the valley entrance. They destroyed the communication equipment that connected the assault force to their commanders. They disabled the automated weapons that had been guarding the only exit, and then they waited. The hegemony soldiers in the valley suddenly realized they were cut off. No supplies, no communication, no way out. The Korvathi hunting packs began to pick them off, one group at a time. They struck at night when the enemy could not see them coming. They attacked from above and below and from directions that should have been impossible. They made sounds in the darkness that kept the hegemony soldiers awake and terrified. For 6 days the hunt continued. The hegemony soldiers who had entered the valley as conquerors became prey. They stopped sleeping because every time they closed their eyes, another patrol would vanish. They stopped eating because their supplies had been destroyed. They stopped fighting as a coordinated force because their communications were gone and their officers were being targeted. First, on the 7th day, the survivors tried to surrender. There were fewer than 2,000 of them left out of the original 10,000. They emerged from their hiding places with their weapons lowered and their hands raised in the universal gesture of submission. The Korvathi accepted their surrender, but not before the hunting pack surrounded them completely, so that the hegemony soldiers could see exactly how badly they had been outmaneuvered. 4,000 Korvathi had defeated 10,000 hegemony soldiers. They had lost only 83 warriors in the entire battle. It was the most one-sided Korvathi victory in 30 years. News of the Battle of the Throat of Kallus spread through the Legion like fire through dry grass. Soldiers who had never questioned the honor code began whispering about the old ways. Officers who had watched their units die in pointless charges started asking questions about alternative tactics, and everyone was talking about the human who had made it possible. General Thalvex summoned Lyra to his command post. She walked in expecting to be arrested or executed. Instead, she found the High General sitting alone, staring at a holographic display of the battlefield. 83 dead, he said without looking at her. In 30 years of fighting, I have never seen a victory with so few casualties on our side. Your soldiers did the fighting, sir, Lyra replied. I just reminded them of what they already knew. Thalvex turned to face her and she saw something in his black eyes that she had not seen before: uncertainty. I have spent my entire life believing in the honor code, he said slowly. I have watched my soldiers die by the thousands, and I told myself it was acceptable because they died with honor. But now you have shown me that they did not have to die at all. He stood up and walked toward her until he was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his massive body. You have made me question everything I believe human. You have undermined the foundations of our culture and our identity. You have turned my soldiers into something that our ancestors would not recognize. Lyra felt her heart pounding, but she did not back down. Your ancestors would recognize them perfectly, sir, because your ancestors fought the same way. The honor code you follow is only 300 years old. Before that, the Korvathi were hunters and survivors, and they were proud of it. Thalvex was silent for a long moment. I know, he finally said. I have read the ancient texts. I have always known that our history was more complicated than what we teach our young. But I was afraid of what would happen if that truth became widely known. What were you afraid of? That we would lose ourselves. That without the honor code to bind us together, we would become scattered and weak. The code gave us unity and purpose, even if it also gave us death. Lyra thought about this carefully before responding. What if you could have unity and purpose without the death? What if you could honor your ancestors by surviving instead of dying? What if the greatest honor was bringing your soldiers home alive? Thalvex looked at her with an expression she could not read. You are asking me to change everything. I am asking you to give your people a chance to win. The High General turned away and stared at the holographic battlefield for another long moment. There will be resistance, he said. Many of my officers would rather die than abandon the old ways, and there are those in the coalition who prefer the Korvathi as we are. Reliable soldiers who never retreat and never question orders. I know. They will try to stop us. They may try to kill you. I know that too. Thalvex turned back to face her, and for the first time since she had arrived on Veth9, he looked at her not as an insult or an inconvenience, but as an equal. Then we will have to make sure they do not succeed. Commander Chun, because I am tired of writing letters to families telling them their children died gloriously. He extended one of his 4 massive hands. Welcome to the Korvathi Legion, human. Let us teach my people how to hunt again. Lyra took his hand and shook it. She knew the real fight was just beginning. The Hollow Sun system was named for the dying star at its center, a dim red giant that cast everything in shades of crimson and shadow. 7 planets orbited this ancient star, and 5 of them had been turned into fortress worlds by the coalition. Over decades of warfare, the hegemony had conquered and lost these worlds multiple times, and now they were coming back with the largest fleet they had ever assembled. Over 300 warships carrying nearly 500,000 soldiers against them stood the Korvathi Legion, 80,000 soldiers and 47 ships that were mostly outdated and badly maintained. The coalition had promised reinforcements, but they would not arrive for at least 2 weeks. Everyone expected the Korvathi to be annihilated. Lyra had other plans. We cannot defeat them in a direct engagement, she told the assembled commanders. They outnumber us in every category, ships and soldiers and weapons. If we fight them the way they expect us to fight, we will lose. She activated a holographic display showing the hollow sun system. So we are not going to fight them that way. We are going to make them fight on our terms. Her strategy was unlike anything the Kovathi had ever attempted. Instead of defending all 5 fortress worlds, she ordered the evacuation of 3 of them. The hegemony could have those planets. For now, she concentrated all Kovathi forces on the 2 innermost worlds, Varith Prime and Varith Second, which were positioned close together and could support each other. By giving up territory, we gain concentration of force, she explained. Every ship and soldier we have will be working together instead of spread across 5 separate battles. The first hegemony assault came 3 days after their fleet arrived. They expected to find Kovathi defenders on the outer fortress worlds and were surprised to discover them abandoned. This made their commanders overconfident. They pushed deeper into the system faster than they should have, leaving their supply lines stretched and their rear unprotected. This was exactly what Lyra wanted hidden. In the asteroid fields that filled the hollow sun system were dozens of small Kovathi strike teams. They had been positioned there weeks earlier, disguised as mining operations. When the hegemony fleet passed by, these teams emerged and began attacking supply convoys. They destroyed fuel tankers and ammunition, transports and medical ships. They planted explosives on communication relays. They struck quickly and vanished before the hegemony could respond. Main enemy fleet was forced to divert ships to protect their supply lines, ships that would not be available for the assault on the fortress worlds. Meanwhile, on Varith Prime and Varith Second, Lyra was preparing a surprise. The traditional defense of these worlds had always focused on holding the major cities and military installations. Lyra abandoned most of them. Instead, she moved her forces into the wilderness, the mountains and forests and cave systems that covered most of both planets. The hegemony will land their troops and capture our bases and declare victory, she told her soldiers. And then they will discover that the bases were never the real defense. We are the real defense, and we are everywhere. The hegemony assault force landed expecting fierce resistance. They found empty cities and abandoned fortifications. Their commanders were confused but pleased. This was the easiest victory they had ever achieved. Then nightfall. Kovathi hunting packs emerged from the darkness. They struck isolated patrols and vanished. They ambushed supply convoys moving between bases. They assassinated officers in their own command posts. They collapsed tunnels and blocked roads and contaminated water supplies. The hegemony soldiers, who had landed as conquerors, found themselves trapped in a nightmare. They controlled the cities, but the wilderness belonged to the Kovathi. They could not move in groups smaller than 100 without being attacked. They could not sleep without guards, who were themselves attacked. They could not eat or drink without wondering if their supplies had been poisoned. And every morning, they found fewer soldiers than they had the night before. The hegemony commanders tried to bring in more troops, but their supply lines were being shredded by the strike teams in the asteroid fields. They tried to carpet bomb the wilderness, but the Kovathi just moved to different hiding places. They tried to negotiate a ceasefire, but Lyra refused to respond. For 9 days the siege continued. Lyra barely slept during this time. She was coordinating dozens of simultaneous operations across 2 planets, while also managing the space-based attacks on enemy supply lines. Sareth worked beside her, translating orders and intelligence reports and managing communications with units scattered across the system. You need to rest, Sareth told her on the 7th day. You are pushing yourself too hard. I will rest when we have won, Lyra replied. The hegemony is close to breaking. I can feel it. One more push, and they will retreat. On the 9th day, the hegemony fleet attempted to land reinforcements directly on Varith Prime to overwhelm the Kovathi through sheer numbers. This was the moment Lyra had been waiting for. All ships engage. She ordered the Korvathi fleet had been hiding behind Varath II, using the planet's mass to shield them from detection. Now, they emerged in a coordinated strike that caught the hegemony landing operation in its most vulnerable moment. Transport ships full of soldiers were destroyed before they could reach the surface. Escort vessels were caught between the Korvathi fleet and the planet's defense systems. Hegemony fleet was forced to choose between protecting the landing operation and defending themselves. They could not do both. They chose to protect themselves. The landing operation was abandoned. Thousands of hegemony soldiers who had already landed found themselves cut off without reinforcement or resupply. Most of them surrendered within 2 days. On the 14th day of the siege, the coalition reinforcements finally arrived. They found a hegemony fleet that had already begun retreating. A coalition reinforcements finally arrived. They found a hegemony fleet that had already begun retreating. A coalition reinforcements finally arrived. They found a hegemony fleet that had already begun retreating. Fleet that had lost nearly 100 ships and almost 200,000 soldiers. The Korvathi had lost 8 ships and 4,000 soldiers. It was the most decisive coalition victory in the entire war, and everyone knew who was responsible. Lyra stood on the bridge of the Korvathi flagship, watching the enemy fleet withdraw. Tholvevs stood beside her, and she could see something in his eyes that she had never seen before. Pride, not in himself but in her. "You have done something remarkable, human," he said. "You have given my people a victory that will be remembered for generations." "Your people won this victory," Lyra replied. "I just showed them what was possible. You showed us who we could be, and that is a gift beyond measure." He placed one of his massive hands on her shoulder. "The coalition will want to know how we achieved this. There will be questions and investigations and demands for explanation. But before all of that, I want to say something that I should have said the day you arrived." He turned to face her directly. "Welcome to the Korvathi Legion, Commander Chen. You have earned your place among us." Lyra felt tears forming in her eyes, but she blinked them away. There would be time for emotion later, right? Now she had a war to win. News of the victory at Hollow Sun spread across the coalition like wildfire. For decades, the war against the hegemony had been a slow, grinding defeat. Systems lost one by one, and species wondering how long until they were next. Now suddenly everything had changed. The species that had been written off as hopeless had won an impossible victory, and they had done it under the command of a human. The Coalition High Council summoned Lyra to testify about the battle. She traveled to the capital world of Dazara, accompanied by High General Thalvex and Captain Vorath, who had become her most trusted lieutenants. The council chamber was an enormous dome filled with representatives from all 12 coalition species. There were the crystalline Veth, who communicated through patterns of light, the insectoid Crix, who thought as a collective, the amphibious Maru, who could survive on land or underwater, and many others, each species unique and each one curious about the human who had done what none of them had managed to do. High Counselor Thres, a tall thin being with 6 eyes and skin that shifted colors with her emotions, addressed Lyra directly. "Commander Chun, we have reviewed the battle records from Hollow Sun, and we have many questions. But the most important one is this. How did you convince the Korvathi to abandon tactics they have used for centuries?" Lyra thought carefully before answering. "I did not convince them to abandon anything, Counselor. I reminded them of something they had forgotten. The Korvathi were hunters long before they were soldiers. Their ancestors survived and thrived using patience and cunning and misdirection. I simply helped them remember those skills." "You make it sound simple," another counselor interjected, a Crix whose thoughts were translated by a mechanical voice. "But our records show that the Korvathi have resisted any change to their military doctrine for generations. We have tried to advise them ourselves, and they refuse to listen. Why did they listen to you? Lyra glanced at Thalvex, who nodded for her to continue. Because I was not trying to make them less Korvathi. I was trying to help them become more truly Korvathi. Their honor code was created to impress other species, but it was killing them. I showed them a way to be proud of who they really are, instead of who they thought they needed to be. She stepped forward to address the entire council. Every species in this coalition has unique strengths, but those strengths are being wasted because we are all trying to fight the same way. The hegemony expects us to meet them in direct combat where their superior numbers and technology give them the advantage. We keep playing their game, and we keep losing. She activated a holographic display showing the strategic situation across all war fronts. What if we stopped playing their game? What if each species fought in the way that suited their abilities instead of trying to conform to a standard? That helps no one. The Krix can coordinate across thousands of individuals simultaneously. The Muru can operate in environments that would kill other species. The Veth can communicate instantly across any distance. She looked around the chamber. We have been treating our differences as problems to overcome. What if we started treating them as weapons to use? The council members murmured among themselves. High Counselor Thress's skin shifted through several colors before settling on a thoughtful blue. You are suggesting a fundamental reorganization of coalition military strategy. I am suggesting that we start fighting to win instead of fighting to survive. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some counselors were skeptical. The coalition had existed for centuries, and its methods had kept them alive this long, even if they had not led to victory. Others were intrigued. The victory at Hollow Sun was proof that new approaches could work in the end. A compromise was reached. Lyra would be given a new position, Supreme Tactical Advisor to the Coalition. Combine forces with authority to implement experimental strategies across multiple fronts. She would work with military leaders from all 12 species to develop tactics suited to each one's strengths, and most importantly, she would train human advisors to do the same work she had done with the Korvathi humanities. Role in the coalition was about to change dramatically. When Lyra returned to the Korvathi fleet, she found Sarath waiting for her with news. The other human advisors have been reassigned. Sarath reported, they are being sent to different species. Each one will try to do what you did here. Lyra thought about the 11 people who had arrived with her on that transport ship so long ago. 7 of them were dead, killed in the early battles before she had figured out how to change things. 4 remained, and now they were being asked to replicate her success with species they had never met. They will need training, she said. They cannot just walk into an alien army and start giving orders. They need to understand the culture first. The coalition has approved a program. Human advisors will spend 3 months studying each species before being assigned. You will oversee the curriculum. Lyra felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. It was not enough to win one battle or even one campaign. She had to change the way an entire alliance fought. She had to train others to see what she saw, the potential in every species that was being wasted by outdated thinking. She had to win a war that had been going badly for longer than humanity had known other intelligent life existed. When do we start? She a Skedsereth version of a smile crossed her face. We already have. The first group of advisors arrives next week. Lyra nodded and straightened her uniform. Then, let us get to work. We have an alliance to rebuild and a war to win. She walked toward the planning room, already thinking about the challenges ahead. The Korvathi had been the first to change. Now she had to help 11 other species find their own path to victory. It would be the hardest thing she had ever done, but for the first time since the war began, there was real hope that the coalition might actually win, and Lyra Chun intended to make sure that hope became reality. 3 years had passed since the Battle of Hollow Sun, and the war had transformed beyond recognition. The hegemony was retreating on every front. Not in the slow grinding collapse they had inflicted on the coalition for decades, but in the sudden, cascading defeat that their commanders could not understand or stop. The Corvathi had become the most feared fighting force in the galaxy. Hunters who struck from shadows and vanished before the enemy could respond. The Crix had weaponized their collective consciousness, coordinating attacks across dozens of simultaneous battlefields with perfect timing that no individual mind could match. The Maru had taken control of every ocean and waterway in contested systems, emerging to strike and disappearing into depths where the hegemony could not follow. The Veth had become the nerve center of coalition communications. Their instant light-based transmission, allowing commanders to respond to changing situations faster than the enemy, could adapt. Every species had found its own way to fight, guided by human advisors who had learned to see potential instead of problems, and at the center of it all was Lyra Chen. She stood on the observation deck of the coalition flagship, watching the stars drift by. Her hair had gone gray at the temples from stress and sleepless nights, and her face carried lines that had not been there when she arrived on Veth 9 4 years ago, but her eyes were still sharp and her mind was still racing with plans and possibilities. The door opened behind her, and she turned to see High General Thalvex enter, followed by Sarath, who was now a general herself. "The final battle is tomorrow," Thalvex said. "Our forces are in position. The hegemony home system will be surrounded within 6 hours." "How are the troops?" Lyra asked. "Eager. They've been waiting for this moment for generations. Every species in the coalition has sent their best soldiers. They want to be part of the end." Lyra nodded slowly. "Tomorrow they would attack the hegemony capital, the world that had launched 1,000 wars and conquered 100 species. If they won, the war would effectively be over. If they lost, everything they had built would collapse. I have been thinking about the people who sent me here," Lyra said quietly. "The coalition leaders who assigned 12 humans to the Corvati Legion, expecting all of us to die. They thought they were making a meaningless gesture, a sacrifice of disposable soldiers to satisfy humanity's request for involvement." Sarath moved to stand beside her. "They could not have known what you would accomplish. That is exactly my point. They did not know because they did not care. They looked at humans and saw nothing worth saving. They looked at the Corvathi and saw nothing worth changing. They had given up before the fight even started." She turned to face Thalvex. "Do you remember what you said to me the day I arrived? You said the coalition had given up on your people. They sent you outdated weapons and broken ships because they expected you to lose anyway. I remember. I was angry that day, but I was not wrong." "No, you were not wrong, and that is what made the difference. Everyone expected the Corvathi to fail, so no one tried to help them succeed. Everyone expected humans to die, so no one bothered to see what we might accomplish." She looked back at the stars. "The greatest victories come from the people who refuse to accept that defeat is inevitable. Not because they are blind to the odds, but because they understand that the odds only matter if you play the game the way your enemy expects." Thalvex was silent for a long moment. "You know that whatever happens tomorrow, your name will be remembered. Forever. You have already changed the course of history. I do not care about being remembered. I care about winning. I care about making sure that the soldiers who trusted me to lead them home safely actually get to go home." She straightened, and her voice took on the tone of command that had become familiar to millions of soldiers across a dozen species. "Let us review the battle plan one more time. I want to make sure every commander understands their role." The next morning, the coalition fleet moved into position around the hegemony home system. It was the largest military operation in recorded history. Over 500 ships and nearly 1 million soldiers from 12 different species. The hegemony had assembled their remaining forces for a desperate defense. They knew that if they lost this battle, their civilization would fall. Lyra commanded the attack from the flagship, surrounded by officers from every coalition species. She gave her orders calmly and clearly, directing forces across multiple theaters of combat with the precision that had become her trademark. The battle lasted for 3 days. On the first day, coalition forces secured the outer defensive stations, cutting off the hegemony from any possibility of reinforcement. On the second day, ground forces landed on the 3 moons that protected the home world, establishing bases for the final assault. On the third day, the combined fleet broke through the last defensive line and achieved orbit over the hegemony capital. The enemy commanders requested terms of surrender. Lyra accepted, standing on the surface of the conquered world, watching hegemony officials sign the treaty that ended the war. She felt strangely empty. This was the moment she had worked toward for 4 years. The moment when all the sacrifice and struggle would finally mean something. But all she could think about were the people who would never see it, Torres and Kim, and the other human advisors who had died before she figured out how to change things, the thousands of Korvathi soldiers who had perished in battles before she taught them to hunt. Millions of beings across all coalition species who had given their lives in a war that had seemed unwinnable. She had led them to victory, but she could not bring them back. Sareth found her standing alone later that evening, looking at the alien stars. "You should be celebrating," Sarah said. "You just won the war. We won the war. All of us. I just show people what they were capable of." Sareth was quiet for a moment. The Korvathi had a saying: "A hunter is not measured by the prey they kill, but by the pack they lead home." You have led more soldiers home safely than any commander in our history. Lyra finally smiled. "That is all I ever wanted. Not glory or fame or power. Just to bring people home." She looked up at the unfamiliar constellations. "Humans were supposed to fail, you know? We were sent here to die. The Coalition expected nothing from us, except bodies to throw at an unwinnable war. And instead you showed us how to win. I showed you how to be who you really are. Hunters and survivors and fighters who refuse to give up. That was always inside you. I just helped you see it." Sareth placed her hand on Lyra's shoulder in the human gesture of comfort that she had learned over their years of friendship. "The songs they will sing about you will last for 1,000 years." Lyra shook her head. "I hope they sing about all of us, every soldier who fought and every commander who trusted me and every species that found the courage to change. This was never about one human. It was about what we could accomplish together." She turned to face her friend. "Come on. I believe there is a victory celebration waiting for us, and after 4 years, I think we have earned a night off." They walked together toward the lights and sounds of celebration behind them. The stars shone down on a galaxy that would never be the same, because one human had refused to accept that failure was inevitable, and in doing so, she had changed everything.